And that's how he was different than all his brothers, the timing of his being born of God. And his title, his position, the one who was to come. That's how he was different than his brothers. But he wasn't different than his brothers by being this eternal God who popped down from heaven and did this little token sacrifice that he was contracted to do and then went back up, which is Christianity, which is Christianity's explanation of who the Jesus God is and what he did. The Word was planted in him. The Word was alive and was in him. And he heard the Word. And the Word gave him life. The Word told him who he was. That is the Word of God. The living Word. This mechanism. This Spirit. Which contradicts the Christian doctrine that this is the Word of God. These are words printed on paper. The Word of God is not here. This isn't the Word of God. These are words that were preserved, that tell a story, tell a secret story. But it isn't the Word of God. The Word of God was that which was planted in the Son, that he understood about himself, that he had to grapple with, that he had to struggle with, that he had to contend with, because that Word told him that he was this Messiah. And he had to contend with that, because it was not obvious, because he wasn't a God who knew he was a God. He was a man who heard a word and he wasn't sure, and nothing was ever sure. Nothing is ever sure with that word. It's something that, if it's planted in someone, he has to struggle with and contend with and grapple with and believe. And the reason it's significant is because he has to do all that. The reason it's significant is because it goes against the animal way. The animal way is to have everything explained. The animal way, the way that man is to be able to comprehend everything about everything that is happening so that he can judge whether it's valuable or not to follow, to do a certain thing. And the Word spoke to the Son. This Word, this Spirit, the mechanism that God used to interact with the animals whom he chose, whom he ever chose. This Spirit who wasn't another God, who lived with the other two gods eternally before. The Spirit which was just a mechanism. This is the Word, the living Word, that's hold this Son of Man, that spoke to him inside himself, in the secret places, in his heart and his mind. It told him he's the one. And he had to contend with that, and he had to say, it doesn't seem like I am. And he had to choose to believe or not believe. Because it wasn't obvious, because he didn't look like the one. Solomon looked like the one. Solomon was the one who looked like the one. But Solomon was not the one. Solomon assumed he was the one, and he called himself the one. He assumed himself to be the subject of Nathan's prophecy to David. But he wasn't the prophecy. He wasn't the one whom Nathan talked about. In 2 Samuel 7, when God told Nathan, and Nathan told David about the Messiah who was to come. And to the humans, Solomon looked like the logical choice. Solomon looked like the king in great pomp, splendor. But Solomon was not the one. Although he looked to the animals like the one, but this Jesus didn't look like the one at all. So when this word told him that he was this one, he had to struggle with that. He had to grapple with that because it wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious to him, and it wasn't obvious to those around him. His own family didn't believe he could be the one because he didn't look like the one to the animals. The animals need to see and need to look, and they need to be able to judge and evaluate whether that's true or not true. That's how animals work. Is it worth putting my all into this? Is it worth believing this? Do I have enough evidence that I can see to say whether it's worth doing or not? And this is where belief comes in, because the son had to choose to believe or not believe, because it wasn't obvious, but he heard this word saying, "You are the one." But he had no validation on the outside, and that's the way it is with the sons of God. God makes them struggle with what they hear about themselves. And they get no validation from the animals on the outside. They get no verification from the animals. So they can't believe because of that animal tendency to need to be able to have all the evidence and to be able to weigh and judge and evaluate. But there is no capacity to do that where God is concerned, because the animal is evil. The animal listens to the devil, this talking snake, the voice of instinct. And that's what is driving the animal to want to evaluate and judge and see if there's enough evidence, and then decide based on its so-called ability to see. But the real Jesus didn't have that ability to do that, because God didn't give that to him. God kept that verification, that validation away from him. God kept him hidden. He didn't appear to be anything on the outside according to the animals. The animals didn't validate him. If they were excited about him doing a miracle, their excitement turned to frustration because he never would give them that thing that they were after, the same thing that wants to be able to evaluate and verify